Hello everyone, this is Julia from Craft Room Adventures for HelloSweetums.com. Thank you so much for joining me. Today I have another scene card to share with you, and for this I used the adorable Snowy Smooches stamp set by Hello Sweetums. I stamped all of my images onto Strathmore Bristol smooth cardstock with Versafine Onyx black ink, and now I'm coloring them in using Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers. If you're using Zig markers, Bristol really, from what I've found, is the only way to go. They blend out beautiful on this paper. I think it's because of the coating. And if you're having trouble with Zig markers or other watercolor or water-based markers, just try using Bristol. You may find that it works a lot better. I'm coloring in my penguins using the blender pen and the number 902 in natural gray. And I'm just placing the color where I want my shadows to be. I place them down at the bottom and basically around the rim of the image because I want them to look rounded. And off to the side I have a piece of scratch paper where I'm just cleaning off my blender in between so that the color doesn't get too intense or too dark. I usually do 2 layers of color. And it's important to let the layer dry before you move on to the next. That's why I'm usually switching around between images so that the layers have time to dry in between. It doesn't take long at all, but you want to make sure that they have a little bit of time to dry. Also when switching colors, because you don't want them to bleed into each other because they are water soluble. Now I'm just using a bit of light gray to shade in the tummies of the penguins, and I'm just barely tracing it around the frame of the face and just blending them out with my blender. Now I'm just going to use a little bit of pink haze marker to add some blush to their cheeks. I just add some dots and blend them out with my blender pen. For the arms, I'm using beige, and I'm basically just coloring in the arms of the little snow penguin. And for the noses and feet, I'm using the color orange. Now onto the Christmas trees, and for those I'm using turquoise green. Just laying down 1 layer of color. I again add my color where I want the tree to be the darkest. So the layers that lie on top of each other, there would be a natural shadow. So I'm just adding a little bit there, and also on the bottom, just to give it a little bit more depth. I'm doing the same thing for the second tree. Laying down 1 layer of color. Using the blender between all of those, after I color the tree once, I clean off my blender on my scratch piece of paper. And now I'm going in with a second layer. Again with a turquoise green. Now to add a little bit more depth to my image, I'm using marine green. And to make sure that the color isn't too intense because it's a really dark green, I just scribbled a little bit on my glass mat, as you can see on the right side of the screen. And I'm just picking up the color with my blender to add it to my image so that I can dilute it a bit before taking it to my paper. Here I'm just adding a little bit more of the marine green, but a diluted version, with my blender pen to deepen up the shadows, and for the tree trunks I'm just using a little bit of the color beige. For the candy cane and the hat, I'm using wine red and purple. I wanted it to be a more reddish purple, and since the zigs don't have that particular color, I just mixed those two, a true red and a true purple, which ended up with a slightly pinkish purple. Again, just coloring in one side and blending them out with my marker, I just layer them on top of each other and they just blend out beautifully. You could also just blend the two colors together, but I like to use the blender because it gives me a softer look. Now for my background, I'm using a piece of Bristol smooth cardstock again. I'm starting my ink blending with shaded Lilac Distress Oxide ink. I'm starting a little above the center of my panel, and then I'm going in with Wilted Violet from the top. Going back in with shaded Lilac to blend the two colors, just moving the colors back and forth. And now for the top part, I'm using Seedless preserves. Again, I'm just alternating between the colors, trying to blend them, get the best blend I can, and also intensifying them because I want it to be a deep purple night sky. And of course, for a night sky, you do need a really dark color, which in my case is black soot. I really like that the oxides are sort of transparent because they layer so nicely on top of each other, so I can add the black, but it looks like the black and purple. I'm just adding more black, then going in again with the Seedless preserves to blend it. Make sure I don't have a lot of harsh lines. It looks wild at the beginning, but once you blend and once everything dries, it looks really, really nice and smooth. I wanted to add some splatters to my background, so I put a little bit of the liquid stardust from Lawn Fawn mixed with water onto my mat, and I just splattered that onto my background to create a starry look. Now I'm stamping my sentiment from the stamp set Snowy Smooches, and it's penguining to look a lot like Christmas, which I think is totally adorable. I'm just using my grid from Simon Says Stamp to line up my stamp in the center of my panel, and I want to heat emboss it, so I used my powder tool to remove any static cling, and then I stamped it with Versamark ink. Now I'm using the Ranger embossing powder in silver in the super fine version because I like using the really, really fine powder for any sentiments because they just turn out beautiful. Off to the side, I had my heat gun heating up, and now I'm just melting the embossing powder until it's smooth and shiny. I want to include an action wobbler on this card, and for this I need to stamp the outline of my penguin only. So I cut the penguin part, and I'm just using it as a mask to ink up my stamp, so I just have the outline inked up. I'm stamping with Distress Oxide ink in shaded Lilac, and my first impression wasn't as good as I wanted it to be, so I'm repeating the same step, placing in my mask, inking up the stamp again, removing the mask, and then stamping down again. In case you didn't know, oxides stay wet for a long time, so you can heat emboss them. And I really like doing this. I use the Nouveau embossing powder in Shimmering Pearl, but I did make a little bit of a mistake here because I forgot to use my anti-static powder tool. In this case, I really didn't mind because it just looked like sparkling snow all around. I also added a little bit all around the panel so that it looks like it's just sparkling snow. I die cut 2 hill panels with the Mountains of Magic dies from Hello Sweetums. I die cut the mountains from black cardstock and the snowy caps from white glitter cardstock. And now I'm just adhering them to my panel using liquid glue. I realized that the mountains were adhered a little bit too low for my hills, so I just moved them up a tiny bit. If your liquid glue isn't dry all the way, you can carefully peel them up and just re-stick them. I'm placing down my hill panels using foam tape. The hill panels were die cut with the Slippery Slopes dies by Hello Sweetums, and I really love those dies because you can die cut the hills with or without stitching. It's optional, so that's really nice. I added foam tape to the back of my images, and now I'm just figuring out the placement. I glued the Santa hat on top of my snowman penguin, and I'm just adding the candy cane to one of the others, just using liquid glue and using my reverse tweezers to hold it in place. I'm adding foam tape or foam squares to the back and just placing them down. Just removing the backing sheet. Now for my action wobbler. This is the first time using them, so I fiddled around quite a bit, but in the end it turns out it's really easy. You place the side with the full stick adhesive on the back of your image, and the side that has the little hole in it onto your background. And since they both come with double-sided adhesive, you just stick them down. I had a little bit of the Oxide on my penguin, and I just used a sand eraser to remove that, as you can see here. And that finishes off my card. I really like the action wobbler mechanism. It's just so cute. All the stamps and dies can be found on hellosweetums.com. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this video and are enjoying my holiday card series. I would love it if you would consider subscribing to my channel for more crafty videos. On screen I have listed 2 more videos that may interest you. Have a wonderful day. Bye!